Hello and welcome to another special episode of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Regular listeners will know that we round up the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. But this week, we're doing something a little bit different. Your regular episode with Mike and I will be back in September. For now, we're going to try something new. My name is Ben Whitelaw. I'm the founder and editor of Everything in Moderation. And I'm joined by Mike Masnick, founder and... Do you call yourself editor of Tech Dirt? The kind of head honcho?
Sure. Yeah. I always have trouble figuring out what do I call myself or even how do I describe myself. And so, whenever I'm like introduced at like conferences or whatever, I always ask other people to describe me because I never know what to describe me. But yeah, like if it comes down to it, I'll say editor of Tech Dirt. That works.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Internet guy.
Yeah.
Long-time internet guy also works. Good to see you again. It's been a few weeks since we recorded. Our last episode was a little bit different. We talked a bit about the podcast, how we came together, what the last 18 months have been like, and kind of looked forward as to the future of the podcast. And we got some really nice responses from folks who have listened. Thank you to those who took the time to listen and send in some thoughts. One in particular, Mike, well, a couple that I wanted to flag.
Sure.
One user on Blue Sky, who shall remain nameless, criticized the amount of time we spent on episode titles. Which, if for people who didn't listen to the last episode, we spend a bunch of time trying to come up with clever titles that we think kind of summarize the complexities of the episode. We were promptly told in no uncertain terms, stop doing that. It doesn't add anything. I disagree. But I don't know how you feel about it now.
Yeah, no, I disagree too. And that person was basically saying that they don't look at the titles, and it's somebody I know too. So like, I don't. We're not being mean here because I'm sure you'll listen to this as well. We're not going to name you. We're not going to call you out. But it was basically like I don't even look at the titles, and like I get it. Some people don't, and I think maybe there was a false implication in the way that we described the process when we had that discussion, that it wasn't a fun process. It's a really fun process that I really enjoy. And yes, we put work into it and time, but I think it's part of the fun. And we did get a bunch of people who responded to that actually saying, no, wait, like the titles are great. Like we really like the titles. So as an aside, if you listen to this podcast and you do not look at the titles, please go look at the titles. We put a lot of work into them. We think they're kind of funny and fairly clever. And we're very proud of them. And we know that a lot of other people, we do get a lot of responses actually from people who really like the titles. So we hear from a lot of people. I understand some people don't ever look at podcast titles. That's fine. But for us, it's a part of the process. And we know for some of you that you enjoy it. So we will continue to do that, even though a friend suggested that maybe we could save a little time by not doing it.
I jest with the about the criticism. It's maybe a compliment that this person and maybe others don't look at the episode titles and still listen.
Yeah, of course.
So I think that's a fair response. A couple of other folks we had talked about on the podcast ways of funding the podcast going forward. We have come to the end of a small pot of funding that we've used to do the first year of the podcast, and it's allowed us to kind of get the software and pay our producer Lee and pay towards some of our time. And we were thinking about ways of making sure that we can continue this in a stable way. And Patreon came up in a couple of suggestions. Yeah, some folks were saying that they paid just to hear us say anything that we felt was interesting. They said that they disliked our voices. But I don't think we're going to start just rambling into a microphone and putting that up on Patreon. But it was nice to hear from people who were keen to get a bit more from us, potentially behind the scenes in the future.
Yeah. Very, very interesting response. We really appreciate everyone who's reached out since that episode came out. And, we're talking to lots of people and we're exploring a lot of options in terms of, what we're going to do to keep the podcast going. And so we're, I think, happy to hear from so many people who were interested. And if you're listening to this and you're in a position to help us keep the podcast going, please reach out as well.
Yeah, that includes folks who are from companies who are interested in sponsoring the podcast. We've had a few people come via the website in the last few weeks, Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com/sponsorship if you want to know more. And yeah, it's been a really positive response from folks. So thanks for everyone who got in touch. We've also had some reviews actually since the last time we spoke, Mike, which is not something we've been able to say for a while. And I've got a bit of I've got a bit of beef about the reviews. I'll be honest.
Oh yeah,
and some kind of a bit of a critique about.
You can't have a beef about reviews. You have to be nice to the people who review us.
Well, let me start with this one.
Okay.
You will understand why I have some beef about this one. I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs. I don't know how many. It's probably 150 words in length. I'm gonna just read it to you.
Okay.
It starts. If there's one podcast I never miss, it's Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Great start. Love it.
Yeah.
No qualms. This is a rare show that consistently hits the perfect balance between sharp analysis, grounded nuance, and just the right amount of snark. Lovely. That's exactly how I describe what we do. No.
This sounds
and you
great.
will not. This is where I have an issue. Mike Masnick doesn't just host the conversation; he elevates it. Mike Masnick.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing about Ben Whitelaw.
Oh, yeah.
His insight into the intersections of speech, policy, and technology is unmatched. He connects the dots between court rulings, platform decisions, and global trends in a way that somehow leaves you smarter without ever feeling like you're in a lecture. I'm thinking I'm going to be introduced in a second. But then it goes on, and honestly, he's kind of my spirit animal. What?
Oh boy.
What is going on? Has this person ever listened to the podcast? Does he not know that there are two people who do it? It goes on. I can't even bring myself to read the last two paragraphs. Stuff about there's no lazy hot takes, no false balance. It sounds a bit AI generated, I'll be honest. And then I did the most basic of sleuthing, and I looked at the name of the reviewer, and it all became very clear.
Uh-oh.
The reviewer's name is O. Mikhailo. Which, Mike, is that not your pseudonym?
It is not my pseudonym. I have
Could that not
nothing
be
to
a
do with
pseudonym?
it. Look, if I was going to write a fake review and, pump up my own ego, I would not put it under my own name.
Which is exactly what somebody who has done that would say.
This is not me. This is not me. It is a very, very nice review. I agree that you should be named as well. And in fact, the point that it starts out with saying that I don't just host the conversation. It is usually you who is hosting the conversation and prompting me to ramble on aimlessly for a good hour or so. So yes, look, this podcast is a teamwork effort between the two of us. And so I appreciate the review. It's very, very nice. But Ben should be named when discussing these things.
I think all of it is true about you. I was just a little bit disappointed not even to be mentioned.
Yeah, and it does feel a little weird. Like it is. This is a stunningly nice review, and so thank you to whoever Michaelo is.
Yeah.
Or Michaelo, I don't know.
You can call your mum later and thank her yourself.
But yeah. This is a 2-person operation. I mean, 3-person if you include Lee. And I do not deserve 100% of the credit. So please dial back that. It is very nice. But
it's very nice.
But Ben is an important part of the equation here.
Yeah. I for now, it seems only for now. But no, that was one review. A couple of others. One, which was also very nice, which seems a bit more, I would say, human generated. It mentions both of us, which obviously is nice. Mike and Ben bring an invaluable level of expertise in trust and safety. They do a wonderful job selecting a broad variety of news stories. It's an easy to listen podcast. Very nice. Thank you very much for taking the time to leave that review. Kind of interesting visual that I had with this review, because it finishes. It's great for commutes, the gym, or just around the house.
Yeah. Now,
we've talked about in very early episodes of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, people listening to us while they're doing the chores.
Yes.
And that's probably something that, folks do. We're a quite easygoing, I guess, kind of mellow listen, while you're just pottering around the house. I didn't think that we would be the listening choice for people, I don't know, bench pressing or squatting or,
You never know. Everyone, has their own. I think it is fairly common for people to listen to podcasts while exercising.
Yeah. 2 thoughts. Do you think we should incorporate any kind of like gym I don't know, encouragement, in between sections, and maybe we should be expanding into a gym product.
Yeah,
a new gym line.
Keep it up. Keep sweating. You can do it. We believe in you.
Yeah. Give me another 10. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
It's funny because I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and certainly chores and commutes. And then I have found, though, so I don't go to a physical gym. I actually every day pretty much will walk up over a big hill near where I live to a park, and then I exercise in the park, and I have a whole routine.
Nice.
The walking part, I will listen to a podcast, but as soon as I get into actual serious exercising, I have to switch to music because
you don't listen to us.
I do not listen to us while exercising. The walking part I will, but not, once it gets into like actual strenuous exercise stuff.
Yeah. So you listen back to, this is an interesting question, maybe. We have never discussed this.
Yeah.
You listen back to us after the fact to see how,
I do.
I do too. But I didn't want to admit that without you saying so.
Yeah, I listen to every episode and sort of self-critique. It's always an effort at trying to improve and sort of figuring out, usually it's like, my God, well, you just shut up. Why do you keep rambling? But that's just like, basic standard self, loathing stuff that comes with the territory, I think.
Yeah. Same. It's a kind of self-flagellation that goes on, which I think is all good. And then, then to do a gym session afterwards, it's a double hit.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I do actually think it's important that, I know some people don't like to listen to themselves, but I actually feel that it is a good way to try and improve, is to listen and see how it comes out.
Yeah. And let me be clear, no judgment on our listeners for where and when they listen to us. We're very, very glad.
Yep.
That was the first time I think somebody had said that.
I will make one note, however, which is that I always listen at accelerated speeds, between 2 and 3x speed, sometimes 3.5 if I'm really feeling it.
Wow.
And I think everybody judge for yourself. But if you listen at accelerated speeds, I think it makes it sound much better.
Do we speak slowly?
I don't know that we speak slowly. I think we just sound smarter when we're fast.
God, I can only imagine what people think about us if they listen on normal speed.
Yeah, it is. There is this weird thing. The brain adjusts very, very quickly, so that I don't think it actually makes that big of a difference. But if it happens, sort of, people have talked about, and I've heard this with other podcasts that I listen to at like 3x speed, and then if it suddenly switches down to like 1 for some reason, it feels weird. It feels like they're drunk or something. But you just sort of get used to it. But that's only if it like switches. Within a few minutes, your brain immediately readjusts again, and then it's fine.
Right. Okay. Well, I will try to keep the speed as consistent as possible for the 2x and 3x listeners.
I always had this idea that, like, because I think people sound smarter when they speak faster, but you can only speak as fast as you can speak, is that we should record the podcast and then release it at like 1.2 speed. Just a little tweak. So for Lee, our producer, when you listen back to this, just think about it.
I like it. Talking of reviews, we could have talked about this last time we got together, but you actually got a review passed to you on a piece of paper at TrustCon.
Yeah.
Which I think is the first time we've ever got a physical
it was
review. Great. So it's not on any of the platforms.
No.
It's been given to you handwritten on a piece of paper.
Yes.
And you're going to read it out, and it's maybe going to mention me.
This one, I swear, was not written by me. But yeah, this was a very nice. Someone came up to me and introduced themselves at TrustCon, and we had a lovely conversation earlier at TrustCon, and then at the live recording, they handed me a 5-star review. Let's make that clear. This is a 5-star review. Excellent. And it says that the Ctrl-Alt-Speech is a huge part of our trust and safety team, keeping up on the news and legislation that affects our work. And I should note, this is a person who works in trust and safety for a relatively new startup, an up-and-coming startup. And it says, it definitely helps us with our work, where we're often playing the role of the third parent of the online world. And notes that Spotify has no reviews. You can rate a podcast, but you can't review it. So saying, keep it up. We appreciate it. And also, this does include a literary reference. If you can find it.
I already Googled. I've already figured it out.
You cheated.
Well, I had a guess. I haven't read this book.
Okay.
But I know that The Third Parent is a piece of fiction. Have you read it? Did you know that?
I did not, but I assumed, because that was the only thing that in reading this where you're like, what is that? First, it just gave me a second's pause. So what is the book? What is it?
It's a book by Catalog Thought and Elias Witherow.
Okay.
Which is, it looks from the kind of description like a kind of horror thriller, and it sounds quite creepy, actually. The Amazon kind of synopsis says that it starts with a knock at the door. It's about a young guy called Jack. I don't really know if it's something I would read.
Okay, fair enough. But there is a literary reference, so we appreciate that. And I'll just close it out that there is a PS with the review, which is that my handwriting sucks. It really does. So my wife wrote this for me.
So thank you to both the reviewer and their wife.
Yes,
that's very kind of you to send that in person.
Yes, it was great.
Yeah, if you are thinking about giving us a review, which we really hope you are, it is faster and more helpful if you submit one online. But we will also take physical ones at conferences, including TrustCon, where we will almost certainly be next year. Thanks, everyone, for that.
Yes, but make sure you mention Ben.
Yeah, please. If I'm still doing this by next year. No, so we've talked a bit about reviews. We've talked a bit about our last podcast. Today is really about answering listeners' questions. And we had flagged in a couple of episodes ago, we were keen to hear from listeners and very open to answering questions that maybe we haven't touched on or got round to answering. And we were lucky to have a whole tranche of questions come in. And we're going to spend a bit of time just kind of going back and forth on them.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're nervous is going to come up, Mike? Were you concerned about that you might get asked about, I don't know, how old you are or how long TechDirt has been publishing for?
Oh God, no, I'm pretty open on this stuff.
Yeah, but the questions were nice. So maybe we'll get started with one from a Blue Sky user called Hybrid Havoc. A bunch of these have come in from Blue Sky, some via email, some via our website. They say, did you start with a really long list of platforms and their post prompts, which is a reference to how we usually start the episode? If so, how many more are on the list? And if not, is there a process of picking, or is it just whatever comes to mind?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. How does it normally work?
Normally, these days, it works that a few minutes before we're about to start recording, one of us goes, "Oh, crap, we don't have a prompt." And then we scramble. I think early on when we started this idea of opening each episode with originally it was a social media prompt, we did not think that through very carefully, and the fact that we were going to run out of prompts very quick. So we did put together a list. We had a list of maybe 15 or so.
Yeah.
And then once we ran through that, we occasionally will suddenly come up with a few ideas, but generally speaking, we forget about it until just before we're about to record, and then suddenly we scramble. Occasionally, we'll have things where it'll be like a reference to something that we're talking about that week, and we'll say, "Oh yeah, let's just use that prompt." And we've gotten, I would say, a little bit more liberal in what we count as a prompt.
Yeah,
because I think early on it was very specifically like some sort of input, user-generated prompt system. Yep. And now we're just like a motto, something they say on their website, something. But there are days where we'll spend, maybe 10 minutes or so, like both you and I, like scrolling through our phones, like every app we have on the phone. Do any of these have a prompt we could use? So it is not that careful or thoughtfully put together.
No. And I think we're at the stage now where we are also, this is very kind of in the weeds, but we haven't ever captured or written down which episodes have which prompts.
Yeah.
So we don't really know which ones have been used.
We started
kind of do.
That's not entirely true. Like in our spreadsheet for the first 6 or 8 months, I think we did. We were pretty, I mean, no, let's be clear. You were very good at keeping track of which prompts we used. It is possible we've reused some, but I don't think we really have.
There's a few that I'm thinking of that we might have reused, but we've done a pretty good job considering we've been doing this for 18 months.
And I think we found some unique ones, and we've had some fun with it. You know, the fun for me is always when we have a guest host as well, where then, you know, if they're not necessarily a regular listener or didn't even consider like explaining to them the whole opening prompt thing and like watching them figure out like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite that you remember? A favorite prompt?
I don't know if I do.
Because I remember using the prompt for NGL, the youth app. I think it stands for like Not Gonna Lie.
Not Gonna Lie, yeah.
Yeah. And the prompt was tell me your confession.
Yes.
And it really threw you.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I don't really know if I should be actually responding to that in a real way. Which I think maybe shows the power of a prompt. Can you think of others that you've?
Oh gosh, I'm not off the top of my head. I mean, I know we've had some fun ones. Sometimes there are ones that, you know, there's these like random ones. What we used Fizzin once, where it's like, what is that? Like, where did that come from?
What's Fizzin?
Yeah, like every once in a while when we were looking for prompts, I would just do like a Google search on new social media apps, and there are these lists of like 10 new social media apps you haven't heard of, and I just look at the screenshots of each one to see if they have some sort of weird prompt. But you know, I don't know. I mean, I think I also like the sort of fun ones where it's not social media, where there are things like Uber or, you know, one of the task services or something like that. Where it's just a little bit unique and a little bit different.
I think this is a challenge for our listeners. If there are any apps or prompts for any kind of online services that you think we should be using, get in touch with us, podcast@Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com, or go via the website, Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. We'd love to get some more inputs on this and start in September with a whole tranche of fresh prompts. Give us your favorites. We got a kind of secondary question from a different person that actually asked, have any platforms or companies responded to their mention in the intro prompt?
Oh.
Which is an interesting question. Somebody else separately asked, like, are these not sponsored?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was actually just about to say, if somebody wants to sponsor the opening prompt, like, I think we could do that.
For sure. We could have your prompt on the podcast every week, should you wish. We are not closed to any commercial ideas. That's fair to say. But no, I don't think no companies have responded.
No, I don't think we've ever heard from someone who was like, "Hey, use my prompt." I mean, you know, I don't think anyone at Meta is going to be like, "Oh, you use the prompt from Meta from Facebook or whatever."
No, I like the idea that there's a kind of copywriter or a kind of junior UX designer at a mid-sized platform who listens to the podcast and then hears us repeating the 6 words of copy that they spent hours and hours refining and signing off. I'd like to think that person will have a flicker of a smile across their face, but that's
we haven't heard about it.
We haven't heard about it. Okay. A related question to prompts is about the kind of how we build out each episode is how do you balance mainstream coverage with more niche and international stories?
Yeah.
And this is kind of interesting because we're very aware, aren't we, of the very kind of US, Western-centric nature of some of these discussions. And we do talk quite a lot about how do we bring in stories from other parts of the world.
Yeah, and we mentioned a little bit about this in the last episode that we did about sort of the state of the podcast, which is that, you know, I'm very conscious of it where during the week leading up to the recording, I am sort of finding stories from all over the place and kind of sort of what finds me through usual sources, which is often like a mix of Blue Sky, Google News, email, newsletters, you know, just stuff. But then the day before we record the podcast, I will do a more dedicated search. And that includes a few sources that I think are very good that will often turn up less obvious stories. And like, I'm not going to list like all the resources that I use, but one of the really, really good ones is Rest of World, for example, right? I mean, they really, as the name says, cover the non-Western, non-European stories, and they often have a trust and safety, internet, online speech bent. Not always, but they're really good, very thoughtful, great reporting. And so I have a few sources like that I will do a specific check on every week. And then, a lot of it I actually do find via Blue Sky and following a lot of experts, and not just US based, not just European based, but finding people who are in Asia and Africa and South America and following them, people who are a lot of academics and lawyers and folks who are working in the trust and safety space or the online speech space, and just seeing what stories and ideas that they're promoting. And so that is a lot of it. We really do try and balance those things. I mean, big stories are big stories, and there'll be mainstream versions of them, but we're often looking for a mix of both those and less well-known sources.
Yeah, and I'm similar, really. I use kind of Google Alerts and RSS a lot for putting together everything in moderation each week. So that has a number of different kind of search terms and combinations of words set up to try and get some of those stories from those different parts of the world that you mentioned, Mike. There are lots of kind of really interesting kind of B2B small industry sites that actually would never get shared on social media, in all honesty, or you'd never necessarily subscribe to the newsletter, but they often come up in those searches. And so I'm able to kind of at least find out that something has happened in those regions, and they can kind of almost go back and trace the root of that announcement or whatever it might be. So I think that's how, to be honest, is how I came across some of the big stories in Kenya that we've talked about on the podcast. We had Mercy Matumi do a great kind of breakdown of some of the kind of digital labor issues that are happening there. And there are people who I gravitate towards to kind of find out what is happening in a particular country. But it's tricky. There is both a supply and a demand kind of issue. There's fewer people writing about digital policy and online speech issues in countries outside of the US and the kind of Western world in many ways. And also there is, I think, fewer people that probably want to hear about them as a result. So we do have to make a really concerted effort, and that's a challenge that we try and address by being very intentional about it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll note is that, and I find this interesting, is that every week, we dump the stories from each of us into this spreadsheet. And well, I don't know about on your end, but on my end, you always find a bunch of stories that I did not see anywhere else.
Yeah, likewise.
And I'm always like, I always find that great. It's like, because like sometimes I'm searching, it's like, there's really not much this week, or other weeks there's way too much this week. But you always find different stories than I do. There's always some overlap, but we find such different things, and I think that also contributes to some of the enjoyment of discussing these stories.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's go on to our next question. We have a question from an anonymous listener about how we find guest hosts.
Yes.
And how do we contact them? How do we reach out to them? And if they're not set up as podcasters themselves, how do you make sure that they're kind of ready to co-host when one of us is off? Which I think is a great question. I hadn't really thought that this would be interesting for folks, but
yeah, and it is interesting. And the answer is obviously a lot of these people are people that we know. Both Ben and I have spent a lot of time in and around the online speech and trust and safety worlds, and we have a whole bunch of folks that we know, and then we're constantly meeting new people as well. And so throughout that process, when we meet new people, there are times where we're like, well, this person would be good as a guest host. And then when an opportunity comes up, the way it's worked until now is basically when one of us is unavailable or away, we bring in a guest host for the other one. And so then it's just a process of figuring out who would be good and who's available. And I think it's worked out really nicely. I enjoy getting to talk with you every week, but like when one of us is away, I think we've done a really nice job with filling in with the guest hosts.
Yeah. And I think there's two things here for me is like your Rolodex, Mike, is enormous. You have this because you've worked for so long in this space, and you're you are very well connected. We've been able to have these amazing guests, like people who have written books and papers that are still talked about years later and are doing amazing analysis. And so the fact that we're able to call upon those folks and they're willing to stand in when I'm away is amazing. We've also had some folks that have actually kind of got in touch with us and said, hey, I'd like to be a co-host the next time one of you is off.
Yep.
And those people, I won't name them because it doesn't really matter, but those people have been brilliant.
Yeah.
And they've put themselves forward. They often have kind of industry expertise, so they're working in platforms and they're either able to speak to their comms team and reassure them that coming on the podcast is not going to cause serious damage to the brand or the platform that they're working for. But actually the kind of process of talking through the news isn't that easy for somebody who's not necessarily following it in the way that we are. And yet they equip themselves really well. And we sit them down ahead of time, much like we do ourselves, and we talk them through what we're looking for. And they do a great job. So again, if there are people who are listening who would love to be co-hosts, please throw your hat in the ring, get in touch with us. This is part of what Ctrl-Alt-Speech is about, which is widening the voices that talk about this stuff. And when one of us is away, it's a great opportunity to bring people on board to do that.
Yeah. And part of that question too was sort of, people who are not experienced podcasters or whatever, and I think we had mentioned this in the last episode too, like we do, and by we, I mean Lee, our producer, does a full edit and makes us sound smarter. And that includes guest hosts. So,
it doesn't include putting us on 1.2 speed.
No, not yet. But hey, Lee, think about it. So most people actually fit in very, very naturally. I'm always not surprised necessarily, but I'm always impressed at how easily people just, it's just talking and people get into it really quickly. And we've never had a case where things have gone really, really wrong or badly, or it's been a mess or anything. But, Lee is always there to step in if somebody messes up or, just says something wrong and wants to start again, as maybe happened in this very podcast, which you will never hear if you're listening to it.
That kind of leads quite neatly onto another similar question, which is, again, an anonymous listener who's asked, have you ever had a guest or tech mishap that meant you've had to scrap the episode?
Oh.
My kind of contribution here is the first episode that we ever recorded, which I don't know if you remember, was an absolute shit show on my part. I had never recorded a podcast, I think, at any stage, really. Maybe I'd been a guest and somebody had sent me a link and I'd logged on, but I'd never co-hosted, never been in charge. And I was traveling. I was in Paris for a work trip. And I was in a hotel. I had my mic. I'd brought it over on the Eurostar. And the only setup in the hotel that allowed me to be close enough to the mic and see you on screen was sat with my legs under the bed on the floor underneath the TV. Like a kind of, I don't know, like I'd had a raging party and had kind of like conked out on the floor. And if you remember, the Wi-Fi was so terrible, we had these like long delays between questions and answers. And it was horrible. And we were kind of new working together. I was pretty nervous. And I think by the magic of Lee, our producer, he made it work. And we were able to put this podcast out. But I was so nervous that the Wi-Fi and the tech was going to conspire against me. We're going to have to kind of scrap it and start again.
Yeah.
So that's the closest that I came to.
I remember the recording with you in Paris, and I remember that we had some Wi-Fi troubles, but that is the extent of my memory of that. I will say that before we released the podcast, we did record 3 or 4 sample episodes just to sort of get our sea legs under us. And we did have some tech trouble there. And in fact, the platform that we're using to record is a different one than the first one that we used to record the first few samples, because we had some tech difficulty with that original platform. And I'm not going to name names or whatever, including at one point, what happened? We had some issues where we were like losing audio, but then there was one where it recorded me without alerting me. Oh, it was the video. We turned off the video, but it still recorded the video even though we had turned it off. And we're like, wow, that's bad.
That was creepy, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I think I had sent them an email saying, like, you could get in serious trouble for doing that.
Right.
And we got some useless response. They never really dealt with it. But yeah, so I mean, I think we had, I think it's good. We sort of worked out some of the tech difficulties beforehand. But other than that, I don't think we've never had anything that's like really disastrous. We've had little things go wrong here and there, but always stuff that Lee will fix in post.
Yeah. And I think the only, I guess, kind of similar issue is that at TrustCon recently, there was, you were meant to have another panelist on stage. Unfortunately, it can work out, and it was very last minute. So there was just you and Alice and one other on stage. But again, like that's in many ways the nature of doing a newsy podcast.
Yeah, and that sort of stuff
happens all the time.
Yeah, you can roll with a change like that, and then. Even like recording the live podcast, like I've been nervous about the tech side because it's now suddenly out of my control. And we were sort of relying on the AV staff, but like shout outs to TrustCon and TSPA and the AV staff that they hire, like incredibly professional and just totally on the ball. And, I think they were more annoyed at me, like double checking, like, is everything going to work? And they're just like, yeah, of course, no problem. We got it.
We're professionals.
Yeah. And they
unlike you guys.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I don't think we've really had any technical difficulties at all. I mean, there was some stuff early on too, and sort of figuring out how do you get the podcast into the various services and figuring all those things out. But these are like little things. We haven't had any sort of major disaster or anything.
Yeah. And that's a question we got as well from one of our listeners, Mike Murphy. He asked us on Blue Sky, it feels like you're DIY on the production side, as in we kind of do it ourselves. Yep. So he said he'd be interested to know more about what that looks like, the tools and processes. Do you want to just give a kind of high-level overview of like what we use in case folks fancy giving it a go themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it is, as we mentioned, it is really just sort of the three of us, Ben, myself, and Lee, on the production side. And we use the tools that are readily available that a lot of podcasters use. So we're using Riverside to record, which is also what I've used for years for the Tech Dirt podcast. I've tried other services in the past, have used a few different services on that front, and Riverside just mostly seems to work. Every once in a while there are hiccups, but I don't think we've ever had a hiccup directly with Riverside. There was a short period of time where for whatever reason it wouldn't have my camera work, and that was like for like 3 weeks in like February for some reason. I don't know what happened, but then it started working again. We use Descript to edit the podcast. That's Lee's specialty. Descript is sort of becoming kind of the de facto standard for podcast editing. Though Riverside itself is trying to compete with Descript. I've played around just personally a little bit with with the Riverside editor, not the Descript editor. And it's pretty nice. We might try and use that some more. But Descript is sort of the standard podcast editing tool that a lot of people use. And then we use Buzzsprout to host. And Buzzsprout is there's a small group of companies that are in the podcast hosting business. Buzzsprout came very highly recommended. We had not used it in the past, but I spoke to a few podcast people and they all said, just use Buzzsprout. It's easy. It's designed specifically for podcasts. They have good analytics and they've been easy to work with as well. And so, we've been really, really happy on that front. I mentioned Riverside. With Riverside, just sort of starting to play around with their editing tools. One thing that I have done a few times now is test out. They have video, because we don't release video. That's something worth mentioning. We've thought about it. We've talked about it. We may do something. As I sort of dip the toe in the water, I personally was using Riverside's. They have some tools for doing video editing just to do short clips and posted them to Blue Sky. That was more fun to see if we could do it. I have no skills in this space at all. But the tools made it, relatively easy to produce a short 50-second video clip of something we had discussed.
Yeah, and there's an interesting, I guess, thing here that we didn't touch on in the last episode, but is that a lot of platforms now, podcast platforms, are wanting video.
Yes.
It's a kind of engagement tool to keep listeners following along. There's apparently an increasing trend of people listening and watching to podcasts at the same time. It's difficult for us because we're in different places. So actually the video is just too heads on a screen. And if you've seen Mike's attempts at producing those clips, you'll see that it's kind of us looking at a screen, like so many of those like COVID pandemic meeting viral videos, except it's just us banging on about speech online. And there's a kind of thing there, which is like, do we do this? Do we spend time and invest a bit in creating video for YouTube or for Spotify or whatever it might be? Is it worth editing? Is it actually adding anything? It's hard to say. To be honest, like we think the kind of podcast is best in audio form, but yes, if we want it to grow, it might be that we have to kind of go into video as well. So we're figuring that out as we go.
Yeah, we're sort of exploring it too. There's also questions around editing in audio and video is different. These tools allow you to do both, but an audio edit that takes out me stumbling over words and going, don't edit that part, Lee, it is different than if you do it in video where suddenly it becomes noticeable that there's an edit. So I'm sort of watching now, if I do watch some podcasts on YouTube, and I'm seeing some of them do those edits, and it's really not that bad. But, I don't know. Does that feel weird if we have an edit that makes it clear that something was cut out, which you don't hear on when it's just the audio podcast? And, I don't know. I don't know what sort of audience there is to watch it on YouTube, to watch, the two of us.
Yeah. I mean, some of the live episodes have got a bit of listenership, but we're shy guys. We're shy folks. We like some element of anonymity, and maybe we don't want our faces all over the internet.
There we go.
Lol. A few other questions before we kind of wrap up, Mike. These are, I'd bucket them as a kind of future gazing set of questions. The first one is, what do you think will be the big topics in online speech between now and the end of the year? So in the next kind of, I guess, 4 or 5 months, tricky one, I thought.
Yeah, though I think age verification is like the big story in the sort of online speech space now. Obviously, the Online Safety Act, their age assurance, age estimation, part of that going into effect. I know that people in the UK government do not want people to say that it's age verification, but, come on.
What do they want it to be called?
Age, I forget what they said. Age assurance or something along those lines, or age appropriateness, or I forget what the thing was. But I heard through the grapevine that they were getting annoyed that two things. One, that people were saying that the Online Safety Act had just gone into effect when there are different pieces of it that are going into effect at a staged rate, and that age verification was required, but it kind of is.
Right.
But that's not the only place, right? I mean, throughout the U.S. now, we have a bunch of states. After the Free Speech Coalition case, a bunch more states have been passing online age verification laws. Australia is basically going to have online age verification, the DSA and the EU and other places. I think that is a very big story in online speech, and we're sort of seeing how these laws go into effect and what impact it has. So I think that's a really big one. The other big one, obviously, is sort of the role of artificial intelligence within the online speech world, both in terms of like the production of content more broadly, but also how does artificial intelligence play into the questions around content moderation and speech and how all that works. And so I think those are two big stories. I imagine we'll have a lot to cover regarding both of those over the next few months.
Yeah, interesting. I would say, I'll pick two as well. I would say, I guess, the kind of broader US-UK diplomatic conversation that's happening. We've seen J.D. Vance holiday in the UK. We've seen Jim Jordan come to Ireland and to meet Ofcom, and he's done the tour recently. We know that there is cases pending in Europe against X/Twitter, which are probably being held back while these diplomatic efforts take shape and kind of play out. So I feel like it's building towards something. I feel like kind of September, October, November, that's going to explode in some way. And I don't know to what extent. I think when the DSA rule on X Twitter in that long-term investigation that's been going on since 2023, I think that it could open a floodgate of new news around this stuff. So I think that's something to pay attention to. And I would also say, I guess age verification is maybe the first part of it, but the broader tools ecosystem that is developing around regulation, as people are being asked to build in protections against, for children and for other groups online as regulation is enforced, people are going to have to start to go out to the market and procure tools that help them keep users safe. And that was a kind of optional thing in the past. It's now going to be mandated. There is already a growing set of tools out there. There's, as you say, a series of open source initiatives that are coming to the fore. And that's only going to increase. The number of tools and the amount spent is going to be big.
And I think it goes beyond just the tools too, right? There's a growing ecosystem of like consultants and, people coming in to do an audit on different services and how safe are you? And I think all of that is only going to grow. And that marketplace is getting more interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that market grows, especially in response to the regulatory requirements that are coming into place. Are they just going to be sort of the regulatory compliance function of, we need to check off a box and therefore we have to hire a company that will review stuff for us? Or will they actually go in deep and start making, are there opportunities for people to come in and actually improve online speech in safe ways on various platforms? And I think that'll be an interesting story that as it develops and we begin to learn about where these kinds of interventions actually helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And then finally, and I think this is an appropriate last question to finish on, somebody has asked, will we ever solve content moderation?
Oh, yeah.
Which I don't think we means you and me.
Come on,
I think it means I'm not being very ambitious.
Yeah.
I think it means society as a whole.
No, I think Ctrl-Alt-Speech is going to solve content moderation. And this is why everyone on the planet should be listening to this podcast, because we are going to solve the world's problems.
Yeah, tune in for that one particular moment at an undefined point in the future. The answer is clearly no. I mean, I don't think we should. We don't want to, because the podcast would probably cease to exist at that point. But I don't think it can. I think that's what's fascinating about it.
Yeah.
The trade-offs that we always talk about, I think they're part of the system. I think they're designed to be there in many ways. And we sometimes talk about them as kind of optional or a downside, but like that's kind of part of why these companies have folks in these roles. So I don't think it will ever end. I don't think we'll ever be solved. And we'll be here to talk about it every step of the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like saying, will crime ever be solved, right? There are always going to be things that happen out there, and you need, in a society, you need rules and enforcement. And that is true in online speech as well. It's slightly different. There are some different issues there. But no, it's not a solvable thing. It's not meant to be solved. There's always questions of a constant back and forth in terms of trade-offs and trying to improve things and trying to make the world a better place, in particular in the online world. But again, like a lot of that, as I've said over and over again, really reflects society itself and wider society and the issues that we see in online speech, in content moderation, in the regulations around all of it, really are a reflection of societal issues. And I would love to think that we could live in a utopian world where there are no problems, but that's not really very realistic, I think.
No.
And therefore, I think part of what we're trying to do and part of what Ctrl-Alt-Speech's role in the world is to try and shine a light on these things and the difficult choices and the trade-offs, but all in the hopes of pointing us generally in the direction of a better online world and hopefully beyond that, a better world overall.
Yeah, for sure. That's a kind of very philosophical question to end on, and I appreciate whoever sent that in, giving us a chance to reflect on that. Thanks to all listeners for getting in touch, for giving us a review, both online and on paper, for sending in questions. We really appreciate it. We hope that has been interesting for listeners, and we've hopefully kind of unpacked a little bit more about how we think about the podcast. This is the second of a couple of different episodes we've been trying out in August while we've been traveling and on holiday and things. We're going to take one more week off next week and then be back in September with our usual roundup of the week's news. That's all for this week, isn't it, Mike?
I think so. But I'll just add in, if you're going to write a review, mention Ben.
Amen to that. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com.